just a couple of things. For everyone who's been on one of these coffees with EMBL before, welcome back. And for those of you here for the first time, then welcome, and we hope you'll come back in future. It's absolutely great that we have, again, well over 100 alumni, I think about 130 alumni from around the world who registered for the discussion for this 8th Coffee with EMBL, as well as many members of EMBL staff, or as I prefer to think of them, future alumni, and from all the member EMBL institutes. So once again, we are very honored to have 4 guests with us to lead discussion on some of the topics that have been at the forefront of our minds. So I would just like to introduce each of them before we launch into the panel discussion, starting with Marja Makarow from Finland. So Marja, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, with pleasure. So my name is Marja Makarow. So I was at the EMBL as a postdoc at the same time as Claudia Koch. This was cell biology. I was in Kai Simons's group, and this was in the 80s. Then later on, I was a member of the EMBL Council, the Finnish scientific delegate in the EMBL Council, and more than 10 years ago, I was president of the EMBC. And I also joined at some point the EMBL Alumni Association. Thank you.
Fantastic. So Marja is definitely someone who knows all the secrets from every side of the table. And from the USA, I'd like to welcome Christine Blaumueller.
Thank you, Angus. Yeah, so I am the director of a scientific editing core at the medical school at the University of Iowa. And I was a postdoc at EMBL with Marek Logic from 1996 to 2000. And from there, I moved to EMBO for the launch of EMBO Reports. And I was there from 2000 to 2006. And that was basically my preparation for my work now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. And then I'd like to welcome a current EMBL staff member, Arnaud Krebs.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Arnaud Krebs. I'm a group leader since now about 2.5 years here at EMBL in the Genome Biology unit. And most of my work in the lab is dedicated to try to understand basic mechanism of gene regulation by developing new sequencing technologies. But today, I think we're mostly going to discuss a bit of a side project that started around March this year with the Corona crisis, and solution we started to think both at the logistic level, but also technology development level, on how to tackle population scale testing.
Fantastic. We look forward to hearing about the 21st century version of the Krebs cycle. And then finally, I'd like to introduce from Denmark, Preben Morth. Hi, Preben.
Hi. So I used to be a PhD student at the EMBL in Hamburg from 2000 to 2005. And then I went to with Paul Tucker, and I'm originally trained as a structural biologist. And then I went to Aarhus, did a postdoc there, and then to the EMBL Nordic Partnership in Oslo, also called NCMM, established a group there. Now I'm back in Denmark at the Danish Technical University as a professor. It's 2018.
Okay, fantastic. Welcome to all the guests and participants. We'll start our discussion very shortly. Just before we start, as Nush mentioned before, this is Friday the 13th. At least in some countries, this is traditionally seen as being unlucky. I tried to get a definitive answer as to why Friday the 13th is meant to be unlucky, and I found a range of conflicting theories about that, going from the explanation in the Bible that the Judas Iscariot was the 13th guest at the Last Supper, but also in Norse mythology that Loki, the god of mischief, was the 13th guest at dinner of the gods in Valhalla before he brought ruin and mischief down. I have no idea what's true. Be interested if anyone else knows why that is thought to be unlucky, at least in some cultures, especially in Northern European cultures. I'd be very interested if you could share that with us. In fact, just for fun, if you open the participants tab at the bottom of your screens, you see, as usual, you have the ability to sort of vote yes or no. So if Friday the 13th is unlucky in your particular country, if I understand that in Spain it's Tuesday the 13th, that's unlucky, not Friday the 13th, which I didn't know. But if you want to vote yes or no, if it is, that would answer a question that we were debating. So I'm going to vote yes, but certainly in the UK it is. Just a bit of fun to get us started. Also, I should apologize if I look particularly tired or haggard or less active. It's because of the effect on my nerves of watching the penalty shootout for the Scottish football team last night. And with apologies to any members of EMBL alumni from Serbia who are watching, Scotland deserved to win. So that was a great result. Okay, so moving straight on. A lot has happened since we had our last coffee with EMBL. We are still, I think many of us in participating countries, still highly affected by the ongoing pandemic, but clearly the response and the severity of the problem has varied significantly between different countries. Marja, can I ask you to tell us about how Finland is doing and how you've responded to the pandemic?
Yes, thank you very much. So in Finland, we have the lowest number of infections per 100,000 inhabitants in the past 14 weeks. And this is 53 cases. And this situation has prevailed already for some time. So just to give you a comparison, in France, Switzerland, Belgium, the number is 200 to 250 times more. And so pay attention, this is per 100,000 inhabitants. So today, exactly, we have 73 people in hospitals and 14 in intensive care. And this is obviously very, very little. Our population is 5.5 million. And now the second wave is much, much less severe than the first wave. It's only 1/3 of the infection cases as compared to the first wave. So I will give you a couple of reasons why the situation today is pretty good in Finland. Of course, we don't know about the future. So first of all, the governmental measures. After our war with Soviet Union, a law was put in place, which sort of is for cases of catastrophes like, for instance, war. And this law gives authority to the government to take measures that otherwise would demand new legislation. So to react extremely quickly because there is no need for new laws. And so according to this, then the government very, very quickly took very strong measures. For instance, 1/4 of the population was locked down. All of southern Finland was locked down very, very early on. And in early spring, then schools and universities, workplaces where possible were closed, completely closed, and people went to work and study remotely. And this was possible because we have quite a good level of skills, digital skills, even amongst children in the country. So the next point then was that also because of our last war, we have something very specific, especially in this country. It's called in English, the Maintenance and Supply Security Center. It has all kinds of stuff which you need when crisis emerges. For instance, we had masks, face masks, when they were not really commercially available. And then a very important point is that we have evidence-tested political decisions in our governmental program. This means that the government really relies on scientific evidence what concerns their decisions. So the last point that I want to raise here is the Finnish strategy, which is test, trace, isolate. There's nothing unique about that, but this works pretty efficiently due to the following issue. We, like in many other countries, we have this application to be downloaded into our mobile phones, which detects the closeness of my mobile with a mobile whose owner has been diagnosed positively for corona. The point is that half of the population downloaded this application within a couple of days when it became available. Let's compare to France. 2% of the population has downloaded their application. So that's why the detection efficiency is very, very high. The metropolitan area of Finland, 40% of the infections can be traced, and in the rest of the country, 80% of the infections can be traced. So I stop here, but you can see that the measures are really coming from legislation, coming from the government, and then our population quite much relies on public institutions and sort of, obey what is being recommended.
Thank you very much, Marja. There's a lot of very interesting issues that emerge from the discussion. And I wonder if you could also comment, and I really would invite other people also to comment or ask questions, but I completely understand the effectiveness of a very strident, highly enforced lockdown in stopping the virus spreading. If people aren't meeting, the virus can't spread. But that doesn't provide an exit strategy. And certainly what we seem to see in most European countries, perhaps, is after pretty much all the countries locking down, some sooner, some faster than others, the rate, we flattened the curve to the point where the number of infections across Europe became very low. But it seemed that as with the pressure to revive the economy and get people back to work and kids back to school, and people wanted to go on vacation and businesses to survive, everyone then came out of their houses, started mixing around. And, it seems that since the end of August, we've just seen the viral numbers across many of the countries shooting up again. Does Finland have a perspective on this exit strategy idea beyond simply locking down? Because I presume you can't do that forever.
Well, my understanding is that Finland is not sort of, cleverer than any other nation and country in this respect. So we are very much in a similar situation. The economy, of course, has suffered a lot, and there are entire huge sectors of economy which are virtually dead. Let me just take one example. Lapland, which is 1/3 of the surface of the country, lives on tourism, on foreign tourists who come, to see the snow and reindeers and Santa Claus, etc. That's totally zero. So we are facing extremely difficult times, exactly like the rest of the world.
Okay. And do you think in Finland that will influence how the government would respond to a future pandemic? If next year we have the much expected influenza pandemic, which, if you remember, that was the one most of us were prepared for. It's supposed to happen every 100 years or so, and it's about 100 years since it happened. Okay, we have a saying in the UK that if you're waiting for a bus, none come for, half an hour, and then 2 or 3 come at the same time. Maybe pandemics are like buses, and we'll have several. So how can we afford a lockdown?
Yes. A lockdown, of course, cannot be but a transient situation. So we are in the same boat. We don't have any magic tricks for that.
One other thing that I was very interested in that you were saying related to the uptake and use of the mobile phone apps that helped to identify. I may have misunderstood what I read, but was this developed independently in Finland, France, Germany? And I guess my question again would be, why? Because I've got a feeling in the UK that was something that was late to the table and was not done very well. And it's like, if you have one that's effective, surely to goodness we can, we could have shared that or used it more widely.
Yeah. So this is a Finnish development. I don't know whether it's better than anybody else's developments, but the point is that people should download it. People should use it.
Yes.
So this is a mindset issue.
And so does that reflect differences between the countries in suspicion about their government? I've heard that one of the things that's been here is whether the people trust their government or naturally distrust their government and think someone, Bill Gates or, someone else is trying to mess around with them and steal something from them.
I think this is a very, very important factor. So as I said, Finns, well, we are quite rational, and we trust the public institutions and the government. Of course, there are political differences, that's clear, but nevertheless, when you take your reason, you take decisions, and so we are up to really, to do as we are told based now on evidence. Now, I lived for years in France, and I saw the difference. For instance, it was the H1N1 influenza infection, and I went to get this public service of getting the vaccination. And I was surprised when I, saw the population who wanted that because it was very scarce. And so French people did not at that time take the vaccination at large. And so, all Finns took it. So this is a mindset, this is a psychological thing, and it has very much roots in whether you trust the institutions or not.
Yes, I feel you've really put your finger on the problem. And I do wonder if a lot of the differences between countries is really reflecting that difference in how compliant the population is, which in turn relates to trust. Now, in moving on, so we're going to, a very interesting situation with Finland being close to other sort of Scandinavian, Northern European countries where the situation has been, to some extent, handled differently, and it's very interesting to compare the outcomes. And we're going to talk later with Preben about the situation in Denmark. But let me move across the Atlantic to talk a little about how things are developing in the USA and speak with Chris. So, Chris, would you like to, tell us how things are going? Are you in a second wave? Did you ever get out the first wave? How is it going there?
Yeah, I feel like we're still on a first wave, and it's kind of making its way around the country and bouncing off of things that it's just very chaotic. Peter, if you were to put up that first slide, maybe we can illustrate that a little bit. So this is a map of the U.S., obviously, and the wave started out on the coasts, primarily on the East Coast, but it also had some very large effects on the West Coast. And then over the summer, it kind of hit the southern parts of the country. And now it's heavily focused in those dark blue areas. Those are Midwestern states. And Iowa is sort of that, which is where I am, is sort of a little bit to the right, the second to the last on the right in that slide. And so I just want to tell you a little more about how things are in the Midwest so that we can have sort of a little more background on why things are the way they are. So if you move on to the other slide. Thank you. So again, we've got a map of the U.S. in the upper left-hand corner, and Iowa is circled, and that's one of those 5 states that I showed you that was doing particularly badly right now. And so then the blow up is basically a map of Iowa and the counties within it. And all the blue that you see, so red represents Republican Party and blue represents Democratic Party, so Trump versus Biden. And there are a lot, it's basically the rural areas that are in red, and only places where we have larger cities or university towns that are the blue ones, where there are a lot of people who really, in part are worried about COVID, but also a lot of the other things that the Trump administration has been pushing, and they all kind of go hand in hand. And I think it's very, this breakdown between rural and urban is really important, because it's the sort of the rural areas where people tend to prefer to stay away from, they're not always pushing education. There's a lot of distrust of academia, the sciences, and then government as well. So they really like the idea that Donald Trump is not sort of a standard politician, and that he could just go in there and do sort of non-traditional things. And there's still a lot of that, obviously, because of the way the election went. And so that upper panel is our presidential election, and then the lower one is the Senate race in our state. So it's still very pro-Republican, even though a lot of things happened that hurt the farmers. Our governor is a staunch Republican. She's done a lot of things that were at odds with what mayors of cities and school districts have wanted. They wouldn't allow schools to mandate masks when we went back in the fall. They wouldn't let them close down unless there was a 20% positivity rate, whereas the CDC was saying a 5% positivity rate was already pretty bad. And in fact, it's so extreme that she was actually getting reprimands from the Trump White House because the rates were so high and she wasn't doing enough about it. So that's pretty bad. That's also, we have had a schism between sort of the hospital and the university. The university is also very economy driven. And so they have wanted the students to come back. They have allowed football games to go on because that's a big moneymaker in the U.S. And although they're not letting fans into the stadium, there's still a lot of partying going on with that. We drive down the street and we see 20 people under a little pop-up tent on football weekends. Bars are still open. And we did have a sort of lockdown in the spring, but it was very much up to location-specific policies. So in Georgia, for example, I think they went into lockdown and 2 weeks later they were out of it. Their numbers hadn't really gone down, but that was the governor's choice. So we really haven't had any strong leadership saying that we need to do lockdown. We haven't had any testing that's been done has been kind of pushed by the medical establishment rather than by the government generally. So just we've had a lot of cycles. We've had a lot of young people getting infected, and then that causes, like a few weeks later, we'll see more mature populations getting affected, and then the hospital rates go up. Our hospital is currently seeing a surge and is putting a lot of things in place to try to fix that. And the governor is finally mandating masks for gatherings of more than 100 if it's outdoors, and more than 25 if indoors. So we're really, really late in the game on this. Another thing I wanted to just briefly mention is we are hopeful that Joe Biden will be confirmed. He's already considered the president-elect by much of the country, but there is a lot of disagreement about that. It's still being challenged. But if he does go into the White House, he is assembling a coronavirus task force. He's already doing that, even though he's not completely acknowledged as the next leader. And so he's got former Food and Drug Administration commissioner who's going to be in charge of that. The former Surgeon General is going to be involved, and an epidemiologist from Yale. He's pushing for immediate coronavirus legislation, so expanding testing resources, increasing countries' capacity to make PPE, and backing legislation to create a COVID-19 racial and ethnic disparities task force, because we've been seeing way more deaths among minorities than above sort of basically there's a big socioeconomic difference there. He's also putting together a vaccine distribution plan, and he would like to listen to science by rejoining the World Health Organization. So this is, in a way, how beginning to get back into working with the rest of the world on public health. Other things that might be interesting to this group is he would like to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord of 2015, which Donald Trump has pulled us out of. And then there are all kinds of immigration things that he's talking about with all the border issues that we've had. So I think I'll stop there, but I'm sure there'll be a lot.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah, I mean, I think you've opened up a huge panoply of discussion points that I'm sure we'll want to talk about. So thank you also for reminding us that since our last coffee with EMBL, you've had an election. And I have to say, it's sort of remarkable that you are still carefully presenting this to us as the fact that Biden will probably, but not definitely, be the next president, as if it's not already a fait accompli. I mean, this has played out unlike any other election in a Western democratic country that I've ever seen. Is it really true that, I mean, can you give us a perspective on, I mean, do some people really think that Biden won't become the next president, leaving aside the current incumbent in the White House?
I think there are a fair number of people in the country who believe that this election is being stolen from Donald Trump, which is a little bit ironic because there are a lot of people who feel that Donald Trump originally stole Hillary Clinton's election 4 years ago. And I think it's going to resolve that Joe Biden is going to win, because today there was a headline that Arizona has recounted their votes, and they were very much over. Joe Biden won over Trump very clearly. And there's even talk that they might not have to recount Pennsylvania at this point. But I don't know, just the way things have gone. There have been a lot of unexpected things that have happened in our country over the last 4 years. And so I think we've just kind of learned to be very cautious. But I am very hopeful that Joe Biden will be in the White House by the end of January.
Do you think the fact that there can be such a bizarre, so apologies for, I'm not trying to take a political stance. I mean, it's more just a commentary on how it looks from the outside, that a sort of failure to face up, to the facts. I mean, I might want the weather to be nice, but frequently in Scotland, when I look out the window, it isn't nice. And I can deny it all I want, but if I go out, it will still rain on me, right? So sometimes you have to just accept. You have to accept the facts as they are. Obviously, they are not what you would like them to be. Do you think there's a correlation there between the ability of the population to listen to advice about how to respond to a pandemic? I mean, following on from the point that Marja was making, I mean, why was there such resistance to wearing masks or to just taking basic precautions to protect your fellow citizens?
I think we have a very strong sense of this country, or a lot of people do, not everybody, but that the rights of the individual are much more important than any kind of community effort, and that maybe the community efforts are conspiracies, that they're all based on lies. And that's where I think we haven't really educated people well enough in terms of critical thinking and, having to think for themselves rather than listening to some trusted person and not being willing to shift their views when they see things aren't working. And they're also told that all of these things they're hearing are conspiracies and lies. So I don't know. I really think we need to do a better job getting people information and getting them to understand why the information is actually factual.
Do you think there's an inherent distrust of science because it reflects, I mean, you were talking, and I don't want to stigmatize or categorize anyone unfairly. I'm almost regretting I started down this line of conversation. But do you think that there is, to some extent, a feeling amongst a rural community where perhaps you had a section of the population who typically didn't go to higher education, didn't go into science, who just mistrust science and those sort of data as coming from sort of East and West Coast intellectual liberals who are trying to get them to do things and they just won't accept it?
Yes, I think there's a lot to that. And I think it's because maybe they haven't been exposed to facts from a lot of different sources. I think that's a problem with the way the media is now, and people can choose the radio station they listen to, right? And we have some very outspoken people who go around, claiming things as being true, a lot like Donald Trump does, but these are now radio announcers who, say that, such and such a group has, lied about whatever, and that we can't take that seriously. So, and they don't ever hear the other perspective, or they're so primed from some of those talk shows to believe that they're being lied to by the other side. So it's kind of like once you take a side, it's hard to go back to the other because it's kind of like so convincingly said by the person telling you this. So I think it's really kind of a detriment that we're not all watching the same news shows at night anymore, where things are presented from both sides. It's all just like, okay, I'm going to listen to this show, and this is what this person's telling me.
So this is the echo chamber model, where you don't actually take in and consider facts. You just want to listen to people who will echo your own views. I have to say that while I find this both disturbing and frustrating, I think as a profession, as a group, we have to take this as an opportunity. And I think all of us, maybe led here by Fatima, who's leading the Alumni Association, should take this as one of the challenges for organizations like the Alumni Association, which, as we just proved, has world reach, has a very highly educated and informed membership, to draw the lessons from what has actually been happening and to think, okay, just like we do an experiment, we don't get the result or the outcome that we want. How can we revise our methodology to achieve a better outcome? And the outcome we want is a better engagement with the wider public, so that hopefully we could help to make, no, you're not going to transform things overnight, but can we learn some lessons from this that would help us to contribute to improving the situation? Just making it a little bit better would already be a starting point. I actually think that's one of the lessons from the year 2020 that perhaps as a group that we can do something about. And I really encourage people to contribute ideas or thoughts around this. I mean, this does bring us on to the idea of how do we get out of this situation? And the big promise is that we'll have a vaccine, it will immunize us, we'll be immune, we can go back to life again. Certainly in the UK, there was a seismic shift. There was almost a euphoria when Pfizer came with news that they had fantastic results from their vaccine trials. And the news media were reporting that this was it. One of the very most prominent currently most prominent British clinical researchers based in Oxford announced on the BBC that he thought that was it, basically problem solved. Personally, I would be more cautious. I'm not quite so sure about that. Peter, I think you had a couple of examples of issues relating to the vaccine announcement. Can you share that? Yeah. Okay, so someone in Alabama is cautioning about this. I mean, that also is interesting. I don't know if people think that Pfizer deliberately withheld this announcement until after the US election so that it didn't risk biasing the outcome. But I think there are still some grounds for caution about it, and certainly a need for the time being to explore other options, including abilities to test. So again, I encourage people to share their thoughts with this. But thinking of the idea of testing, I mean, one possibility is that we move to much more localized testing in our work environments. And I'd like to bring in Arnaud, who I believe has been looking into this issue at the EMBL.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I can only report on what we've been trying to do, and this started very early on with a group of people. I mean, early in March, everybody was at home and we're thinking how to tackle that issue, because it was clear that from actually several publications, I would cite one from Jussi Taipale and Stanley Larson, and it's now on medRxiv, but at the time it was just published online very quickly, where they just model the epidemics, and they showed that the interesting thing is testing not necessarily at the level of what is done in diagnostics with very high precision, even with a high rate of false positive or false negative, would actually lead to a very good way to handle that epidemic. So that kind of led us to think, well, maybe there's an opportunity here as a research institute to develop new ways to test in a high throughput manner. And immediately the idea was not to in any way try to do what diagnostics is doing. So if somebody is sick or has symptoms, you would test the person to know if it's positive. But also early on in the pandemic, it became clear that a lot of the spreaders are actually asymptomatic. And so we thought, okay, let's try to set up something. So first we tackled on the technical side, and we set it up a methodology that we named MCQ for multiplex quantification of COVID-19, sorry. And so that's based on NGS. It's not, I mean, at the time it was all new, but actually by then it's like multiple groups in the world came up with different technologies that are doing the same thing. Principle is that you replace qPCR by sequencing, which is very powerful in terms of throughput. It has some drawbacks, but it works beautifully in terms of quantifying the virus. And in the meantime, at university, Michael Knopp, which is actually an alumni also from EMBL, developed another technology based on colorimetric assay, a LAMP assay, has been published by now. It's very complementary because it's a very high turnaround. So, but the bottom line of both of these methods is that we could make them to be very cheap. All these assays are less than €1 per sample, which is amazing. Also, the handling of the sample, which is a big bottleneck, is not too high for both of these methods. And the idea now was to try to push this towards something that we can spread at the population level, but right now we're more like incubating and making pilot projects to see how feasible. The other thing that Michael Knopp did, which was a great initiative, is try to solve the earlier step, which is sampling, because currently the sampling, as you know it, is done by somebody with a medical degree that has to do something very unpleasant. So this was tackled by also trying to prove that saliva samples can also be used for testing. And now we're at the stage where we're really trying to push this through the authorities. So it's really showing how academic centers can incubate those ideas and show that those things are working. And the latest addition to that was actually coincided with the emergence of the second wave. We felt we were ready to actually do on-field testing. So we launched this as EMBL as a big experiment. It's about 1,000 people at EMBL. So if you take today's numbers, which is about 1 to 2, we would expect to have 1 to 2 cases currently running at EMBL, probably not visible. So it was actually an interesting experiment to launch this on-field testing with these new technologies, this low cost. Everything is made with actually EMBL-produced enzymes, so it's all done using EMBL facilities at PepCore. And see, can we actually run this on a weekly basis with this low cost, and is this handleable at that level? And while it turns out that we are about in the 4th campaign now, so we do this on a weekly basis. We've been testing something between 200 and 300 people every week. It starts to give very interesting results. So we start to really have an idea, and we now have clear evidence that saliva testing is actually a very good way. People are self-sampling at home, so they don't need to go to any medical doctor. They pick a kit on Friday, bring their sample on Monday. It's extremely simple, and demonstrating that can be actually implemented at the level of at least an institution. And this is now growing. Our model was also to say, okay, the problem with Corona is that you have places like, Heidelberg was actually interesting at the very beginning of the pandemic, who said, we can contribute to the testing effort. And basically the answer from hospital and everywhere was like, we're trying to feed somebody that is not hungry, because there was massive testing capacity, very few cases in Germany. So very quickly the idea emerged that what we need is also to be modular and be able to deploy without deploying any infrastructure, deploying the resources in places that need it. So now the model we have that we're testing with outstations is that people send in their sample, and within 48 hours, they get their results. So we have some form of centralized testing that can be deployed on field very easily. So these kits are really essentially just a Falcon tube with a small tube. Everybody can do it at home. And this can come to us and be a centralized testing. And while obviously EMBL doesn't have the mission to test the rest of the world, so we want to basically duplicate that model. But just showing that with a couple of ingenious ideas, you can actually show and have a contribution. And just to add and finalize on this, I think it's really working, because we really start to see the results. And at least at the level of EMBL as a community, we think that we're really making a contribution now in keeping the environment safer. So that's kind of what we're pushing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnaud. It's very interesting. Could I just ask quickly, how do you manage the issues to do with protecting identities of people and data protection? Because I mean, that I have seen that as being one of the big obstacles. And in terms of full disclosure, I'm involved with a committee at our university who's trying to roll out a campus-wide testing system, because scientifically we can do it. We've got all the resources. We can do everything. The single biggest challenge we've had is the administrative hoops we have to jump through. Some people are saying, "Oh no, then it's a clinical trial," or "You're not secure enough. You're not." Someone might find out someone else's test result. Or what's about the ethical implication if you tell someone they've tested positive? You haven't got counselors. I mean, it's just like crazy. I mean, utterly crazy. We're in the middle of a pandemic. How did you solve that problem?
Yeah. So that's a very good point. And while you would think that EMBL could be easier there, it actually wasn't the case, because one of the things were specific. So everything had to be set up from scratch. So what we did is to make, and this I give credit to Michael Knopp, which thought about that solution early on. This is presented as, this is essentially a research study. We were trying to establish technologies. So people are volunteering to this. And we make sure this is fully anonymized. Still, we're in Germany, and Germany, you have the obligation to report a positive case, which puts us in the wrong situation if we have a positive and can't tell what that is. So the way we did it is to actually outsource this to the national authorities. So people submit their sample with a barcode. We only handle the barcode, and if there is a positive, it's all reported to the Gesundheitsamt, which is the local health authorities, and they deal with finding the person, informing the person, and doing the local contact tracing, because all of this is useless if you don't do contact tracing down the line. But basically we've managed to outsource everything, and our focus is really, we think we're helping to keep the EMBL community in Heidelberg and now Barcelona as well safe. Plus we are setting up these new technologies.
Great. Well, I applaud you for all these efforts. That's really encouraging to hear about. I don't know, again, maybe that's something people could comment on as to whether similar initiatives are happening at your institutes or campuses, because it does seem that in many life sciences research institutes around the world, the technology to deal with it, I mean, it's not
it's low tech
rocket science. It's low tech. It's low tech stuff. It's more logistics, and then the whole problem. I mean, certainly what we found, but the biggest challenge has been administration and ethics, and just coping with an administrative infrastructure that's not been set up for this situation and is very slow to react and too complicated. At least that's been our experience, which is very, very frustrating, because the science in a way isn't really limiting. The vaccine, I think, I very much hope the Pfizer vaccine turns out to be as effective, especially in high risk categories of people, as they hope and claim, and that other vaccines, which will soon be announced, are also efficacious, and we're all safe from it. I mean, one concern, I guess, immediately you can see with the Pfizer vaccine is who gets it first, and how do you distribute it fairly? Again, very interested to hear people's thoughts or views about that. I really hope that quickly many different companies bring vaccines to the table, to the market, because it's not something you would really feel comfortable about a single organization having control over. And certainly one of my concerns was in reading about this, I may be wrong, it sounded like there was a requirement for mass transportation using cryogenic or minus 70 degree, minus 80 degree freezers. And I didn't know where the infrastructure was going to come from to allow you to distribute that efficiently or effectively in many locations. Again, I don't know if there's anyone online from the pharma industry who could comment on that, or would be around for the second cup and would like to contribute. But I think it's of course we're all very encouraged, but I think we should just be a little bit cautious, assuming that it will all be over by Christmas. And in thinking about that, of course, we have flu vaccines every year, But normally you have to develop a new one because the flu mutates, and of course it's very labile, and a vaccine from previous years isn't necessarily effective against the next strain of the virus. This was a spectre of a new strain of coronavirus that might even not be susceptible to the current vaccines that emerged in the news very recently, and it with the story that there were coronavirus mutants emerging into humans from mink, from farming mink for fur coats or fur hats, and what totally surprised me, I have to say, is that Denmark is the world leading country for farming mink. I had absolutely no idea that this was Denmark's, had this world leading position. But there was a rather shocking story that Denmark was suddenly going to slaughter 17 million mink in response to a fear that there might be a new strain of coronavirus emerging. And some of you may have heard this story, but Preben, could you update us on? I believe there's been new developments on this story. Maybe for people who are not familiar, you could just explain to them what happened.
Yes. So when actually it was a surprise to me that we were so world leading in the mink industry. To be honest, so here's an image of someone who is really in trouble at the moment. That's the Danish Prime Minister in a mink coat, saying that maybe we don't need to destroy all the mink after all. But the problem is that we do here. So Denmark is right here, as you might know, and Denmark, apparently this is a figure from 2016. They have about 17 million minks. So it's quite a mink country. And the region up here is called Northern Jutland. I hope everybody can see my cursor. And that is presently in an absolute lockdown now, after they found that there was a cluster 5 variant of the coronavirus present there, and 12 people had been infected that they think originally came from the mink. And there was also a case on Zealand, which was down here, and but that turned out to be a false positive. Right now, they're discussing, actually at 6 o'clock tonight, they're discussing whether they should open up, because new numbers from the Serum Institute in Denmark came out, and it turned out that there were no problems. The vaccine which is being developed will still be effective against this cluster 5. But that's actually not the issue with this mink story. Probably the biggest issue is that minks, they do live in close cages together, and it's like and of course when they get infected by coronavirus, the coronavirus spreads immediately to the entire farm, and apparently then people can get infected by coronavirus mutated from mink. And then the health authorities in Denmark, they have a precautionary principle, and they said they cannot then dismiss that a really deadly virus will come from here, of course. Nobody can, probably. And then the government, which has the last word in this case, they have then decided that all the minks should be culled in response to this. And maybe needless to say, a big uproar came from this because they're killing an entire industry in Denmark. It's not only the mink industry, it's also lots of the fish that we get. The leftover fish is being processed and used as mink fodder as well. And it's employing more than 4,000 people all over the country. And at the moment, the big problem is that this behavior is only possible because the Danish state was allowed to bring in new, stronger laws that give the government a lot more power than normal in normal circumstances. So they can actually take these decisions without going to parliament, which is what they did. And that it then turned out that this order ended up being illegal. So it has now changed from being an order to a suggestion. But at the moment, I think more than 5 million mink are already killed. So the mink farmers, just like in Finland, Danish people are actually quite responsive to the orders coming from the state. So they did what they were told immediately, hoping that they would get compensated later on. And this is the big deal now, because now the opposing politicians, they are now asking for billions of Danish kroner to compensate for this, which will then have to compensate over a period of 10 years in lost income for these mink farmers.
I mean, it is quite a remarkable story at many different levels. The whole idea that we're moving to a situation as a side effect of this pandemic, where governments are being pushed by the media, by fear of actions, and taking decisions with almost no democratic control, which have far-reaching consequences for entire industries and populations. I mean, I have to say, mink farming doesn't sound like a great idea to me. I've never bought a mink coat in my life, and I wouldn't choose to. But I do respect that there are existing industries, and you should not make decisions about this overnight without fact-based, careful consideration and some sort of democratic control.
No, and of course, this is a global problem. So one could say, well, there's plenty of mink farms, especially in Poland. Apparently, they had planned to finish the mink farming in Holland anyway in a couple of years, but they were killed now, the same with the ones in Spain. And as you can see, there's also some mink farming going on in Finland, together with some fox farming. And the Danish fox farming is going to be stopped in 2023 anyway. So, but of course, that's not the issue here. The issue is that what the state has the liberty to do in these times.
Would you also, just coming back to our first discussion with Marja, when she was talking about how Finland has responded to the coronavirus pandemic, as a closely neighboring Scandinavian country, how would you contrast the situation in Denmark? And maybe this is a terrible thing for me to say, but how would you represent it in your neighbor in Sweden?
Well, I think so. In Denmark had a strong lockdown. We did have similar responses, just like Finland and Norway, and that was very effective. So we actually have less mortality than on a normal year in Denmark at the moment. Basically, nobody dies of influenza anymore, apparently, at the moment. So that's a good thing. Now the problem was then opening up. How much should you open up? Because at some point, people are starting to go bankrupt, especially restaurants and hotels and so on and so forth. Compared to Sweden, I mean, I think that was actually a very nice control experiment, if I have to be so cynical to say that. They, of course, have a much higher number of deaths per capita than in Denmark. And if you ask my personal opinion, maybe we could have done something in between, because neither Sweden, Norway, or Denmark, or probably Finland, were anywhere close to filling up the hospital places in the hospitals. We even sent respirators to other countries in Europe.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'm just responding to the chat. There's been a lot of interesting comments here, and I really hope that we can follow up on some of these in a few moments. Actually, just as a last point, I mean, so 1 hour has flown past once again, which is remarkable. Again, I'd like to invite everyone who has the time to stay with us for a second cup. I'm ready for a second cup of coffee, and I'd really like to use that chance to open up and bring in people in the audience. There's been some really interesting points being made. I just wanted to bring up a point made by Kelly saying, does anyone know what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated before we can feel safe to unlock and go. I had in my head the idea that it was at least 60%, but perhaps there are some clinical, maybe Marja knows better than I do about this. That was a figure I had in my mind. And also, if there are any members of the audience, I don't know if Peter is online again, who was very helpful in the past as a virologist in explaining to us about the biology of coronavirus. I don't know if there's anyone who could also enlighten us about whether mink or foxes are more likely to transmit coronaviruses into the human population, or if there are any other types of animal farming that we have to be more aware of. But I really hope that whatever the outcome is, we learn lessons from this at multiple levels about how to be prepared to deal with the emergence of new pathogens like coronavirus, and also as a society, how we can do a better job in communicating information effectively. So, yeah, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. I don't know if Nush would like to say anything at this point, but I'd also just like to thank Marja, Chris, Arnaud, and Preben for taking part as guests, and I hope you can all stay on for a second cup. Nush, do you want to?
I was simply saying, I know Marja had other commitments at 5, so maybe, Marja, do you have any comments, or Arnaud, to add to this before you leave? Because you may be carrying some thoughts you'd like to add before you leave.
This is Marja, and I don't have answers to Agnes's latest questions, but then I so much agree with you and with what you said about the opportunity for the scientific community. So science advice has really been so much in demand as now, and also the public understands much better the value of scientific evidence, science advice than before, and so we should make ourselves available whenever needed, to contribute to this. Thank you.
And Mario, did you not want to mention a particular scientist you had in mind?
Well, maybe it's out of scope now. I just had an example of Finnish researchers who also have been developing a vaccine. And maybe I just very, very shortly tell you what it is about. So we have 3 star researchers, Professors Ylä, Herttuala, Alitalo, and Saksala, who have been developing a lead vaccine, which now is a single-dose nasal vaccine, which prevents first-line infection. And it elicits a sterilizing immunity already on the mucous lining of the upper respiratory tract. But this is, not yet there. So the situation is such that they have very good results in mice. Clinical trials are beginning in spring, and they have the GMP-compliant manufacturing suits there. They have been there for gene therapy applications already for tens of years. So this is just an example how small countries, also the scientific communities, try to contribute. And of course, similar cases we have numerous of in the countries. So this very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Marja.
I can only second what has been said in terms of communication. My feeling is a lot of what's happening, and it's coming back to the non-rocket science. A lot of this is fairly simple and addressable with the techniques we have, but I feel a lot of it is how much the population is gonna adhere to, those concepts and those measures. I see it from the testing perspective. People are obsessed by false positives, false negative rate, which at the population level don't have much of an impact, but that's something only scientists can explain to the people, that as a whole, the same thing with vaccination and resistance to vaccination, and focusing on those cases that create problems. They do exist and they are a problem. We should address them. At the population level, they're irrelevant. That sounds cynical, but I think we have to communicate this more and more. And I think that's what every scientist should have in mind, and try to have local impact would actually have a very big global impact. That's my current view on the situation.
Well, what would people feel? Thank you, Arnaud. What would people feel about ourselves as a group? Creating, whether it's a website or a YouTube channel or both, or some sort of resource for fact-based information where we can contribute to it, which is completely open. Now, we can't force people to listen to it or watch it. It would be up to us to make it understandable, attractive enough that people would want to engage with it, but where at least we can feel that we are contributing to the debate rather than just frustrated at seeing the misrepresentation of science.
I think
would there be
very
any
interest contribution in that direction is social networks, right? The effect of the mass is important. And usually, I mean, I do it myself when I have time. It's just whenever, you see those comments, I usually it's your close network. It's just bringing a couple of facts very often just kill those conversation that usually go mental because nobody knows exactly what he's talking about. So trying to bring facts, it's tiring and it's sometimes frustrating. But I think if everybody does a bit of it, that might help a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult to assimilate. I mean, there are different. Some things are facts, some of them are hypotheses or opinions, but perhaps just collecting together information. I mean, we've already now had 8 of these meetings. We've learned a huge amount. We've met people with a lot of insight. I can't help feeling that we could contribute to this. Again, at least in some way, to bring together in an accessible format information about the reality of where viruses came from, what is the vaccine, what are issues, even just to put clear information down about what we don't know yet reliably.
Exactly. I think it's just as important, stating what we know and what we don't know, and saying that, we can't possibly explain everything. I think that's what I imply by saying fact. I mean, very importantly, to say what we don't know, and that's usually what's the missing information.
So if I would ask, with putting you on the spot, Fatima and Nush, is that something you feel there's a role for this community?
I mean, I think any side.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
I think the thing is much more complex than what you're kind of posing it, right? Because all of us can locally contribute to educate the people around us. We could make a big effort in, draw something that a web page or something that people would frequently go and click on to look for information. But how do we make this viral enough? How do we reach the people that do not want to listen to us? That's the thing, because people that is willing to abide by the facts, in science, scientific facts, these are the people that is around us and the people that we know. But how do we get to the people beyond that? And that's, I think, key.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely key. And that's why I was hoping that of course, it isn't as simple as just a scientist writing down, this is what I know, this is a scientific fact. How do you present it? But I've been very impressed on many of these events that we've held by alumni who have clearly moved their careers into the field of public communication. And as Nish can remind you, I mean, I don't know if any of... Yeah. We've had, the John Kendrew winner this year. I mean, I was hoping that this community brings together such a combination of expertise and skill sets, not only in science, but many of the alumni who have become teachers, some who have become media communicators, journalists, could perhaps help with that, because I'm for sure I'm hopeless at doing it. So I'm not going to be any use at doing it. I'm sure you can do it better than I can, Fatima. But I think as a grouping, there might be a real opportunity to have that combination of expertise.
So yeah, I think that Sorry. I was just going to say, I'm at a university where there are groups here who do a lot of public outreach, both at the medical school and the dental school, because we do have such a rural population and they know they have to go out there to get their message across. So, I mean, I wonder if there was a resource like this would be a tool that those people could take with them and to, let people know about. And, even if it's just a 1-by-1 thing, that would be a great start. And if you had a very informed set of information that you could pass on, I think that could be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think creating repositories of information that people can look up information is one thing. Something else I know we've had some discussion about is whether there are emerging social media channels that didn't really exist before. Could we find a format that might attract some people who are not typically scientists to come and watch them? I have to confess to the community to a sort of addiction I've developed to watching YouTube videos about all sorts of things like physics and things I don't understand completely, but I just find interesting. And I've been very impressed at some people's ability to make complicated mathematical theories accessible at a level that even I can understand and be interested enough that I come back and subscribe to their video channel and want to listen. I don't see quite so much of that in the life sciences community, but perhaps I'm just not looking because I maybe think I know more about that. But maybe there's an opportunity there. I don't know.
I'd love to add to that, Angus. Having a YouTube channel where you're looking up life science questions would be fabulous to have set up by the EMBL Alumni Association. That's exactly why we have a volunteer program. That's where we have Peter. And if any of you want to do little mini bite-sized chunks where you explain your area, get in touch with us. We could create little films and add it onto this channel. That would be fabulous. Maybe we'll send you an email after this and say who wants to do it. I'm thinking of Freddie, Fatima.
Absolutely. In fact, I was hoping Freddie was still online. I'm not to bring in. I also just wanted to comment on Anya's comment from the chat, which I strongly agree with. Simply referring back to the some of the superstars of Nobel Prize winners may or may not be the right people to do it. I think we have to learn, and I think it's great that some of the alumni already who engage with these meetings have got real world experience of journalism, of trying to put information out and seeing what some of the challenges are. I think I think we could learn a lot from that level of feedback. But it was just a suggestion. But I hope it's something that might be interesting or volunteers to contribute to it.
Angus, looking at YouTube and you see some students doing great classes already teaching basics. We already have everyone online right now who would be able to do already a film for us because of their expertise in their own area. So we should definitely follow up on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Is Freddie still with us or is he logged off?
I'm with you, Angus. All good, but I missed the last 5 minutes because I got a call. So the only thing I heard was YouTube and whether I'm on.
Yeah. So we just agreed, Freddie, that some jobs for you. So we've volunteered you to do a large amount of work on behalf of the Alumni Association, and I think everyone voted you had to do it.
And I'm stupid enough to say yes, I'm here, right?
Okay, and everybody has just heard you accepting the invitation. So. That's one. Would anyone else like to comment on any of the issues that we raised, or have any insight into this? I mean, we've touched on so many topics, and just while we're waiting to see if anyone would like to do that, could I just ask Chris as well, if you're still with us? How? I'm not talking about the will Trump stay president? I think that ship has sailed. I think we have a new president-elect who in the US who's going to move into the White House, even if you have to drag the other one out in January. But I'm interested if you could also share any thoughts about how science policy in America or science funding might be impacted by that transition. Is America going to be a more outward-looking country? Is it going to engage? I mean, EMBL, of course, is an international organization, and we look to promote cross-border collaborations. One of the things I've personally enjoyed the most about science in my own career is the transnational collaborative aspect and making friends and working with people in science from so many different places. Is America going? Is America not going to be great again, but actually going to be collaborative again?
I think so. I think a lot of Biden's proposed policies have been, geared toward, opening up to the rest of the world. I think he realizes how much we've kind of shut down connections with other countries. So, just the idea of rejoining the climate accord, really trying to, a lot of what Joe Biden wants to do is push different types of energy and just dealing with, pollution and things like that. I think he's also made a lot of phone calls to heads of state in other countries. I think he really cares a lot about working with the rest of the world, because everything we do is affected by everybody else, and what we do affects everybody else. And he recognizes that. I think we've gone so far down the road toward closing things off that I think it can only get better. And I really think that with all the climate issues, which he takes very seriously, I think that's going to make a big difference. He's also going to make a lot of changes in immigration policy if he can. So he would like to open things up to people from largely Muslim countries again. So that doesn't really speak to the science, but I think in general that will all kind of help to make things better. The one caveat to that is it looks like we may not get a majority in the Senate, and the Senate has to approve a lot of things. So I don't think things will necessarily go as quickly as we'd like, but hopefully there will be a shift toward global thinking rather than just let's hunker down and be by ourselves. I really hope that will happen.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. And Chris, could you share any thoughts with us from your own perspective? I mean, you did a very good job earlier in highlighting some of the issues involved, where you have a significant component of the American population who are geographically, non-randomly distributed, where it seems that there are sections of the community, there are states where it's difficult to communicate in a way that maybe works great in San Francisco and Boston, but maybe doesn't work so effectively in Iowa, or at least in some parts of a rural Midwest. How do you feel you could engage those people who have a natural distrust of science, academia, government? Maybe they put them all together.
That's a really good question. That's kind of something I've always struggled with, and I admired, EMBL and EMBO for doing so much science and society stuff, but it's obviously more of a challenge where I am now. I think the best thing I can think of is what I already talked about a little bit in terms of the university sending people out. So if you have somebody who needs medical or dental help or something like that, and you help them, maybe then they'll be more open to hearing more about how you got to that point. So, and there are other things like a lot of the grants here. So anybody who applies to the National Science Foundation has to have an education component, and that can be graduate students. But usually, if that's all you have, that's not good enough. A lot of people actually go out to schools, and maybe if instead of focusing so much on local schools, if people made an effort to go out to, cities 3 hours away or something like that, maybe that's something we should be pushing in communities like this, that really, really to get out there and get the message to people while they're still interested in learning and curious about things, and so maybe more open to science. But, it may be a slow process, but I think that would be a great starting point.
Yeah, in the city where I live, we have something called Cafe Science, where academics are invited every so often to hold a public lecture, essentially in a cafe, where people can go and get a coffee and listen. And they're reasonably well attended, but they still have limited ability to really communicate, and they're not very flexible or rapid. I mean, they tend to be arranged far in advance. It's not something that really focuses on current affairs so much. It's not so well suited. And that's where I think there might be an interesting opportunity, not as an alternative, but in addition to those activities, to have something like a social media presence where you might be able to communicate geographically with a broader, more diverse community. But I must admit, I don't know if that's true. I'm going to rely on Freddie and other volunteers here to come in and figure out how to do it. Any other volunteers?
It's been a marvelous discussion in the chat room. They've been really, really excellent, and I'm amazed at your ability to talk to the camera and read what's been going on. Yeah, but I think a really important question is who gets the vaccine first, and of course the answer to that is the health workers. Like one of my sons who has been in Sydney's largest hospital in their COVID-19.
Sit up. It's not.
No. He's an emergency medicine doctor, and a source of great anxiety to everyone, but to us and his family. But beyond that, we've got a few obvious target groups like diabetics, the obese, and the aged. And as Kelly McNagny listed, an interesting, also recent finding was people who have antibodies to interferons seem to be particularly susceptible. As published in Nature a couple of weeks ago, people who have that genetic inherited that 55 kilodalton block of DNA from Neanderthals appear to be particularly susceptible. But sorting out this quandary as to why is it that some people who you would not expect to die from COVID-19 have died, and others have no symptoms at all. So I think focusing on that question may make a really big difference. That it is obviously solvable. What other factors involved in these unexpected deaths? What my son told me about. They had in their intensive care ward. They had a 40-year-old. He was a marathon runner in Sydney, and he died, and they couldn't explain it. So there's some extra components in this disease, and we have the technology to sort this out. I think, as proved by Svante Paabo and colleagues, finding this linkage to Neanderthal DNA, and there are going to be other things that we can discover here, and then direct vaccination at these high risk people because we have evidence.
Yeah, no, I think, evidence-driven decision-making is absolutely critical. You're absolutely right, Francis, that there's a lot still to be learned about what really constitutes risk beyond some obvious things with severe, obesity or other things that basically weaken your immune system or make you more susceptible. There's also a condition. It's not only immediate death, although that's a fairly serious one. But beyond the idea of dying, there's a phenomenon that I've heard described as long COVID, where it's effectively a post-viral syndrome where people don't die, they recover, but boy, it's not life as normal. They are basically very debilitated, very weak. They have long-term symptoms. They haven't died, but actually their quality of life and ability to work and exist is hugely compromised. And I think that's been sort of swept under the carpet or ignored a bit compared to the more obvious number of deaths involved. And I think that's also affecting different groups of people, including younger people who maybe aren't in the same at-risk groups. I confess I don't know all the facts. I don't know if that's also been commented or recognized in the other countries that people are living in. Certainly in the UK, that's been recognized as a problem. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to find out about it. I feel as that there's so many opportunities on the back of this to learn how we can communicate with people so that we do get the most informed, fact-based responses. So I hope we can rely on your abilities, Francis, to contribute to efforts going forward.
Yeah, perfectly. I had another rather obscure point to add, even though we're past the 90-minute moment, is that, the biggest impact on public health that has been made by knowledge has not been the discovery of antibiotics and, fantastic medicine and so forth. It's been, understanding that we need good sewerage and that we need good hospitals. That's the thing that's important. And what this pandemic should do, in terms of public life, is emphasize the fact that we need to expand the capacity of hospitals to respond to crises like this. We need the public systems to have the capacity to be built with the expectation that these crises are going to happen.
Yes, I agree. I think as maybe a concluding point for today, I think if it's taught us anything, this pandemic has taught us of the danger of being unprepared. And it's sort of a shame on all of our countries that we were all so unprepared for what has happened. And this, I hope that is something we can learn from and be better.
Well, I think tonight we found out that we can exclude Finland from your comment.
I was
that they were wise enough to be prepared.
Yeah,
because they took the right step.
Yeah, I agree. And the other observation I was wanting to make is I really hope that we can set aside, we all of us, not just the audience today, can try to set aside the usual nationalism that where we're all trying to compete like at the Olympics, and actually draw the right conclusions and be objective enough to say, who did a good job here? Where did it not just to throw mud at the politicians, but just to learn from it. It's just like as scientists, you do an experiment, and what do you say in German? This skaten den Hosen. It doesn't work out the way you expected, and you learn from it. If you're a successful scientist, you learn from what didn't go right and make it better the next time. And I hope that we can all set aside the nationalism and wanting to say my country did better than yours, and just accept that all of us could do better in the future, and let's see what happened, and can we also contribute to it. I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to come back and join us and to announce that one of our guests then will be Ian Matai, who many of you will remember from your time at EMBL.